Our clothes, as a mirror, reflect the history of civilization. It is more than second layer, as nowadays fashion and style became the way of self-expression, seeing deep symbolism in surrounding material things. Speaking via things and rituals is absolutely in Kazakh style. That is why the history of national costume is an incredible world exposing our mentality. On today's program, Nomads open clothes, Kazakh Khan's gifts, fashion on rope. So, the first story is about chapan. Today it is difficult to find something more representing Kazakh than clothing piece which is called chapan, in Kazakh language shapan. You can very rarely find it in the everyday wardrobe of a modern Kazakh. It, however, remains a relevant element of the Kazakh national costume. More often, it is worn during rites and holidays. It is usually custom-made and given as a souvenir present. One can find them in the museum, theater, cinema, and on the fashion podium. Today, we will show the Kazakh chapan from different sides, and you will see that it is much more than just clothing piece. It was chapan, or rather its stylization, that transformed the standard protocol shooting of the presidents of France and Kazakhstan into the discussed event of 2014. People still remember photos of François Hollande in Kazakh costume. Huge resonance was also caused by the picture of the Hollywood star Nicolas Cage in the chapan in the summer 2017. It was presented to him at the Eurasia Film Festival. You will further find out when Europe saw robe-style clothing for the first time. We will also tell whose invention it is, how long it takes to sew chapan, why did Genghis Khan wrap his robe to the wrong side.
Сегодня у актеров праздник. Их приветствуют гости из Ленинграда, из национальных республик.
These are unique scenes of 1938. In a distant from the Kazakh steppe, Moscow, outstanding theater figure Vladimir Nemirovich Danchenko received a gift from the people's artist of the USSR, Kulyash Bayseitova. It was not the first and certainly not the last time when the chapan became universal and such a true Kazakh gift. Famous boxer Mike Tyson, movie star Jackie Chan, and undefeated Kazakhstan boxer professional Gennady Golovkin, they all have their own chapans. Gennady Golovkin not only goes out to his fights in chapan, but also poses on all the billboards in it. Even Queen Elizabeth II once mentioned at the receptions that during cold winter evenings her son, Prince Charles, likes to throw on Kazakh chapan, given to him during his visit to Kazakhstan. So, today we can joke around about the circulation of chapans on toys celebration, over the habit of regifting a gifted robe, but it really is an amazingly viable element of the costume.
Эта традиция прекрасная. Я считаю, что именно благодаря этой традиции
This tradition is beautiful, and I believe that thanks to this tradition, at the time, the Soviet period, when many national traditions of the Kazakhs were taken to the side, not banned, but were forgotten, thanks to the tradition of gifting chapans, these kinds of clothing piece never disappeared from our life. Well-known writer, translator Harold Belger once said, Kazakh chapan is not just an ordinary robe about which the poet Olja Süleymanov once stated that he was supposedly against of showing negligent attitude toward the Jubilee by giving him chapan. Chapan is a symbol of honor, respect, friendship, love, and national tradition. Throwing embroidered, expensive chapan to honored guests' shoulders is an ancient Asian solemn custom.
Я видел всю вот эту вот коллекцию
I saw the entire collection of clothing sets, which the sultans gifted to the Russian emperors, princes. This is a wonderful collection. In the middle of the 19th century, there was a variety and different kinds of these clothing sets with expensive fabrics and embroidery.
Жалким и удручающим, как сейчас. Я видел одну фотографию где-то перед Первой мировой войной.
They appeared from time to time. I saw one photo made before the First World War, I think in 1909. Whether at the royal court or at the house of Emperor's brother was a ball masquerade.
Там фигурировали девушки, юноши вот в костюмах вот из этих коллекций. Там были армянские, черкесские, казахские, узбекские. Это очень красиво.
And there were young men and ladies in suits from this collection in the ball.
Хорошую службу. Приходили художники и срисовывали. Тот же самый Верещагин.
Armenian, Circassian, Kazakh clothes are all very beautiful. And another thing, artists painted these robes. For example, Vereshchagin, who was given the robes to paint, dressed a model into a robe and painted.
Он мог надевать на этого, на своего натурщика.
Delight and admiration of aristocrats and artists to Oriental clothes is understandable for us. No wonder why modern couturiers and designers build their collections on elements of ethno style. For example, the work of Jean-Paul Gaultier is characterized as cultural nomadism. His models seem to have intermixed in space, symbolizing nomads. Ethnics must become some kind of fresh blood, which will give new life to all new fashion trends. Fashion designer Jean-Paul Gaultier. Oscar de la Renta drew inspiration from the motifs and colors of our Asia. By the way, when it was necessary for our national fashion designers to make themselves known for the first time, they bet on the ethnic vanguard and won. But we will talk more about that later. Eastern civilization can be found not only on fashion podium but also in the streets, internet and social networks. It is always comfortable, beautiful, spectacular and so native. The most Kazakh type of clothing appeared before the Kazakhs, even long before their ancestors, the ancient Turks. Scientists believe that a robe-like form of clothing could be invented only by a man rider because the wrap-over style is more convenient for the rider. But it is very hard to even approximately calculate the birthday of the chapan. Among the artifacts of the Bronze Age, when the nomadic type of system was born, remains of robes are not found. However, they are often met during excavations of monuments of the Saka and Han period. To understand what kind of figures and dates we can talk about, look at the Golden Man from the famous Issyk burial mounds. The young ruler has a mini version of the robe, and he lived about 2,500 years ago. And this is another well-known archaeological monument, Botai. It is the north of Kazakhstan, and conditionally speaking, Botai is twice as old as Issyk mounds. It is a settlement of ancient people who were first to tame a horse. Here, even found fragments of vessels, the first kumuz was being prepared. But we do not know what the first horse breeders were 5,500 years ago yet. There is a chapan in the dressing room of the oldest theater in our country. It was worn by recognized masters of the Kazakh stage. Bright colors are still not faded. This work of art still stands out against the modern versions of dressing gowns. It's hard to tell who would be more amazed, steppe girls seeing modern sewing machines and computer-aided design of ornaments, or we, after hearing that this whole robe is embroidered by hand, and this is a many-month work. Nowadays, it takes about 5 to 6 days to make a chapan, and if clothing piece requires hand embroidery, then even more time. By the way, did you pay attention to the fact that the Kazakh chapan has only a left-sided wrap-over?
Левосторонний запах, как в европейской традиции в современной принято считать, как бы...
This wrap-over has the same origin as the type of clothing itself, i.e. left-sided wrap-over, which in the European tradition is considered to be female, is most convenient when landing on a horse. And in ancient times, it always was contrary to the Far Eastern, for instance, Chinese tradition. Their robes had right-sided wrap-over, and at least in China it was quite clear and very important difference, the separation of representatives of Chinese civilization from wild roaming barbarians.
Диких кочующих варваров вокруг.
It would seem so simple to identify a nomad, the one whose clothes are wrapped on the left side. But it's not as simple as it seems. Look at Genghis Khan's robe.
Интересен факт, что до XIV века
Interesting fact is that up to the 14th century in Iran, parts of Central Asia and India, robe-like clothing was also wrapped to the left,
тоже запахивалась на левую сторону, что
which is undoubtedly connected with the powerful influence of nomadic culture. And in the 14th century, Mongols brought another tradition.
туда пришла уже другая традиция.
Mongols are those nomads who originally had right-sided, Chinese-sided wrap-over.
Запах был именно на правую, скажем так, на китайскую сторону.
It turns out that some nomads introduced a left-sided wrap-over into foreign fashion, while others weaned whole nations off it. However, it is not first time for nomads. Take, for example, the European fashion of the Middle Ages. Once something unusual happened there. Around the 14th century, French citizens suddenly discovered wrap-over clothes. Note that in Europe, very different costume traditions were in fashion.
Многие исследователи связывают это с
Many researchers attribute this to the previous crusades, during which some elements of clothing were borrowed. And the fact is that appears the kind of clothes which is short, it's wrap-over, but it's not outerwear, and it's worn under armor.
доспехи. И очень интересный термин этой одежды.
So it was worn over clothes but under armor. It was part of a French suit. And the term is very interesting. It was called jipon or jip in abbreviated form.
На восток.
Researchers attribute this with campaigns to the east. Apparently, some transformation took place because the city dweller did not need wrap-over clothes. He felt great in his usual clothes. And if it was a warrior who was in marching conditions,
Распашной одежды. А, допустим, если это воины,
always on the horse, he undoubtedly began to appreciate the convenience of this type of clothing.
начинали ценить удобство такого плана одежды.
This ancient custom called kudalyk or matchmaking is followed by many Kazakh families. When kudalar, future in-laws, agree on the union of the bride and groom, then at the end of the negotiations, the main guest, Bas Kuda, is gifted a special chapan.
бекітілгені, нақты кезілгенін әйгілейтін бір
This chapan is called shege chapan, translated as chapan nail. Why a nail? Because it is used to consolidate the agreement about the union of the bride and groom.
жақсы киім кигізеді. Яғни шапан жабады. Шапан дегенде бұл жерде
When saying chapan, we mean a good overcoat with a collar and the very fact of presenting. Here it should be noted that clothing not only serves as a cover, protection from external influences, but also performs a great function of mutual gifting.
киімнің де жаңағы алыс-берісте үлкен қызмет атқаратындығын айту керек. Кит деген ұғым мәселен құлалардың
The term kit is a phenomenon of great importance for Kazakhs in the exchange of gifts between matchmakers. That's why kit kigasu means to dress kit. Kiyim is translated as clothes, and kit means gifting each other with clothes.
алыс-беріске негізген атауына байланысты сол кит деп аталып тұр.
Experienced couturiers, designers, and stylists can at one glance determine the brand of the clothing piece regardless of the season, the fabric, and the age it was sewn for. And now imagine that before every nomad could tell about a visiting traveler and guest, the places he was from, his status, occupation, age, marital status, if he had children, and much more. All this information was encrypted in clothes, its material, color, ornaments. Moreover, the second shell reflected human beliefs, the desire for well-being, balance with nature and surrounding people.
Универсальностью своей халат хорош, особенно в тех случаях, когда
The versatility of the robe is good. It especially comes to a rescue when a poor peasant has nothing. And the strangest thing is that this robe worn by the peasant imitated the magnificent outfit of the Eastern medieval rulers. It is the same full-length cape, but made from other materials and luxuriously embroidered.
Полунакидка, одежда, которая сделана была, конечно, из другого материала, была роскошно расшита.
This is when we can say that not the robe itself is beautiful, but it is beautifully embroidered.
Не халат красив, а он красиво расшит.
The robe is what brings us closer to neighboring nations. For example, the national costumes of the Uzbeks and Kyrgyz are unthinkable without dressing gowns, and fashionable ladies like to incorporate its modern versions in their wardrobe. Incidentally, in recent seasons, Oriental gowns are experiencing unprecedented popularity. Look at any mass market, there certainly is a wrap-over model. The texture of its fabric, style or colors sends us out to the history of the costume of Central Asian people. The collection of robes from the State Museum of Ethnography in St. Petersburg is a memory of the times when the Kazakh steppes fell under the Russian protectorate. In the 19th century, Shinghiz Valikhanov, father of Chokan, brought them to the exhibition in Russia. This was a kind of presentation of Kazakhstan, so-called mini-expo. But it is interesting that already in those days in the steppe, these magnificent embroidered costumes began to rapidly disappear from fashion. On the protocol portraits, as we would say today, sultans and bees wear laconically decorated chapans. Probably the tastes of the nomadic nobility were influenced by trade relations, industrial development and political changes. At the beginning of the 20th century, life in the steppe, like in the whole of Central Asia, changed radically. The nomads settled down, the city clothes replaced the national costume, but it did not disappear. Kazakh chapan, or rather its scenic version, experienced the true triumph in 1936 on the first decade of Kazakh art in Moscow. When the Republic's stars performed on the main theatrical and concert stages of the USSR, the demanding audience was particularly impressed by national costumes. To be more visible from the stage, the ancient Kazakh patterns on chapan have been specially enlarged, and since that time the concert robe has become strikingly different from museum robes. With the attainment of independence in Kazakhstan, the quest for national identity has become more relevant than ever. In the 90s of the last century, ethno-avant-garde was on the podium, first inside the country and then abroad. For many people, the appearance of the international side season of the East was the great event. It marked the beginning of national beauty contests, Kazakhstan Fashion Week and other defile from well-known brands.
До сих пор уже столько лет прошло. Нет на каком-нибудь из модных каналов или даже когда просто репортаж.
Time passes, and even now on some fashion channels I see echoes of what I saw then, many years ago, on our podium from our designers.
Того, что я видела тогда, много лет назад, на нашем подиуме, от наших дизайнеров. Не надо обижаться, надо только радоваться.
We should not hold a grudge, but only rejoice that the echoes of the creative achievements of our great grandmothers find their place on French or Italian catwalks, because in fact it simply beatifies the world.
Потому что на самом деле это просто украшает мир.
Thanks to domestic and foreign designers, ethnic, Oriental-style clothing continues to conquer the world with its bright patterns, traditional ornaments, natural fabrics. Robes do not leave the fashion podium, theater and stage. Gradually, the average consumer began to choose clothes with national elements, which you can happily wear on Nowruz, Kazakh wedding and family celebrations. Japan is experiencing, if not a triumphant return, then certainly a stylish rehabilitation. Even a brief biography of the Kazakh chappan allows us to understand how lengthy and interesting the history of our clothes is. And one can always find traces of the influence of nomads' taste in the history of the world fashion.